Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm Korey Gunz along with wrestling insider Tom Colohue. And Tom, welcome to our first official episode of the year 2020.
Glad to be back. Glad to be picked up for another season. Yeah, never entirely sure when you start these things off, but apparently the fans loved it, so here we are again for another year.
Absolutely, and I'm sure 2020 is going to be full of news and surprises. And speaking of surprises, we definitely got our share on this last week's edition of SmackDown over on Fox. We saw three pretty big returns over on the Blue brand. John Morrison, who was signed to the WWE a couple months ago, and this was his first official appearance on camera really for the WWE, and obviously apparently he's going to be on the SmackDown brand. We saw the Celtic Warrior Sheamus return after a couple of weeks of vignettes, and then we also saw the Usos make the return to SmackDown. And I want to get your thoughts on each one of these, starting with John Morrison. Like I said, I think he's kind of the headlining act of those three just because he was new to the brand. He hasn't been seen for a while on WWE television. And he returns in a backstage segment, so maybe not the biggest fanfare that you would think for a guy like him, just kind of poking his head out of the dressing room door. But also, he pokes his head out of the dressing room door of The Miz, who apparently is now newly turned heel over on SmackDown as well. So a lot of interesting changes going on in this episode of SmackDown this past Friday. What did you think, first of all, of the way that they debuted John Morrison and also being in conjunction with a new heel turn for The Miz?
I think when it comes to John Morrison, you can look at it in a vacuum and it looks underwhelming. The fact that he literally just came out, said something and then went back in. It seemed underwhelming in that vacuum, but when you consider that was the return sandwiched in between the first return, the second return, well, the third return, and a heel turn right before it, it was very much a character moment for The Miz, and John Morrison was more there for him than anything else. But that's not a bad thing. That means he's immediately walking in with a storyline, with established characterization. You have everything in place already. So while, yeah, it may appear underwhelming, he's already an object in motion. And that's the best thing we could possibly have. If we do have the situation whereby Miz and Morrison are reforming as a tag team, there's instant heat, instant credibility. They're straight back into the race for their tag titles. And when you consider how many tag teams are on SmackDown right now, it's a very good thing. The only question I would have is, did we need more heels? Because we certainly got more.
Yeah, and I think, The Miz and John Morrison both are guys that, maybe you could have even played them off maybe as tweeners and maybe kind of teased what side of the fence they were going to ultimately fall on. But I think also, in my opinion, The Miz does some of his best work as a heel, and I really enjoyed the pairing with Morrison beforehand back when they were, on not only SmackDown, but also were big headliners on the new ECW version, the WWE version of ECW at the time. So I was surprised and kind of pleasantly surprised to see Morrison and Miz reunited. Do you know, or have you heard of anything? Do you think that this is what Morrison envisioned when he re-signed with the company, or was this maybe even a request of his that, hey, if you don't have anything else in mind for me, I'd like to, work again with my buddy The Miz?
I don't think it was a request per se, but there are always conversations before someone signs a contract. How am I going to be pushed? How am I going to be used? You can usually tell when someone's about to have either expired their contract or they are about to re-sign, because they will have a sudden and sort of out of nowhere shot upwards. Gallows and Anderson had that. They were paired up with AJ Styles. They suddenly had a storyline. Braun Strowman was throwing Lashley through the screen. So you had everything there. You have these sudden shots upwards. You look at Matt Hardy as another example. He's someone who is close to the end of his contract, but suddenly he's starting to appear more because they're trying to say, look, if you sign, we'll give you this. Let's get the ball rolling. I'm sure that's what happened with Morrison. It was a case of them saying, okay, if you do come back, here's how we'll use you. Him hearing that and saying, okay, that sounds good to me. I can't imagine he's going to be unhappy working with one of his best friends, someone who really, they had great times together. The fans seem to like it. I'm sure The Miz likes it, and Morrison signed on because he likes it too.
Last thing I want to touch on with the Miz heel turn, and this is something that if people follow you on Twitter that you have kind of been picking up on and have commented on in the past, is the after effect that the Fiend seems to have on all of his opponents that he's kind of been involved with up to this point. If you look back at since his his in-ring debut at SummerSlam all the way up to this point, everyone that he has touched, Finn Balor, Seth Rollins, Daniel Bryan, and now The Miz, have gone through pretty big character changes. You know, we've seen Balor reappear back on NXT and reappeared as a heel. Seth Rollins has now turned heel. Daniel Bryan cut his hair and brought back the Yes movement and is kind of that Daniel Bryan of old that we've seen in the past couple years. And then now we've got The Miz, who just recently was feuding with The Fiend, and he turns heel now and has apparently switched his character back to the bad guy side of things on SmackDown. And one common denominator is The Fiend and kind of the effect that he has on his opponents and the way that he changes them. Do you think that this is an actual storyline, that the WWE has done this on purpose and that eventually something is going to be said or mentioned about it that is going to give us some type of payoff? Or is this just simply fan theory that people have just kind of picked up on and connected the dots and kind of created their own fan fiction of what's actually happening here, and this is just kind of a happy coincidence, and maybe we're giving the WWE a little bit too much credit as far as the thought that they've put into this Fiend character and this storyline?
This answer is going to sound like a bit of a cop-out, but it is all of the above. Originally, it was pure coincidence. You look at Finn Balor, the plans were already in place. I wrote about this before the match had even happened. The plans were already in place for him to take some time away and reboot. They were pitching him several ideas for what differences they could make. They decided on a move to NXT and a heel turn. That was already decided before the match happened. And then he went away knowing what he was coming back to. So that wasn't a part of The Fiend. The Fiend was just the vehicle by which it happened. You fast forward to Seth Rollins. The heel turn there was not the plan, but it did become the plan when reaction to Seth Rollins got so bad that Seth Rollins himself said, I need to turn heel. I need to react in this manner. That wasn't the plan, but it is where we are now. And you've got to remember, around that time as well, we were getting to a new draft, which meant all the storylines that were happening in the WWE came to a sudden and abrupt end. Everything they were planning stopped and had to start again, which gave them the opportunity to turn Seth heel and rewrite things sort of on the fly that would then go forwards. When it comes to Daniel Bryan wanted to cut his hair. He was going back towards the face side anyway. You look at his pairing with Roman Reigns, even though it was a bit rushed. I wrote about this as well. Before Eric Bischoff took over, he wanted to see Daniel Bryan back in that main event picture. That meant turning him face, because he'd done everything he could as a heel. You look at Kofi Mania, you look at his work with AJ Styles. He did fantastic work as a heel, but Daniel Bryan can't be a heel for long. He's too good at it, which unfortunately is also the problem with The Miz. He's too good as a heel for people to boo him. If you want to stay a heel, you need to be Baron Corbin, essentially. You need to be that hateable. But it started off pure coincidence. But when it comes to this Miz heel turn, yes, I think maybe the change was leaning towards Morrison and it was planned, and you see several elements building to it, but it was also a little bit sudden. So I think they're leaning into what is happening with Bray Wyatt, as they did with Kofi Mania, like they did with the main event of WrestleMania. They saw the way the wind was blowing and they leaned into it. This does raise a few questions. I don't know if there'll be a payoff. It really depends on what the main event is of WrestleMania, because I'm confident it's going to be The Fiend in the main event. I'm confident he's going to be against Roman Reigns. And if Roman Reigns loses, are we going to see a heel Roman after so many years when they finally like him as a face?
It would definitely be interesting, and I know that that's something that, again, if you follow Tom on Twitter, that has kind of been a thought process that's gone through his head. And like you said, if we fast forward to WrestleMania, if it is indeed Roman Reigns, the guy that takes on The Fiend, and eventually takes him down. It'll be very interesting to see if they use this opportunity. Again, maybe it is just a happy accident, but maybe it's something they could take the opportunity to turn Roman heel and use the Fiend as the catalyst, or if they just prop him up as the conquering hero and just have him take down the big menace that is the Fiend. Only time will tell, I guess, on that point.
Yeah, and I've got to say as well, I think a lot of fans have driven this when it comes to leaning into it, none less so than our very own Gary Cassidy, who is on a mission to make sure this continues. He loves this storyline.
Yeah, make sure you're checking out Gary's stuff as well. I know even from way back when the Fiend first debuted, me and Gary did a podcast just about the Fiend character, and it's definitely a character that he is passionate about. I'm not sure. He may even be giving Chris Jericho a run for his money as Gary's favorite superstar of all time. Well, let's talk about the second re-debut that we saw the return on SmackDown, which was Sheamus. We have seen some vignettes of him leading up to this week, so it wasn't necessarily a surprise return, but there were some questions again about what side of the roster he was going to fall on, either as a face or a heel. He gets a nice little pop because it looks like he's going to help Shorty G and kind of make the save for him, and then instead Shorty G eats a bro kick, and it appears that Sheamus is going to be a bad guy for the foreseeable future. Sheamus, he looked great physically. If you follow him on YouTube, he's got his own workout channel, and so you know that he's been in the gym and has been working hard, and so now he finally makes his big return here. He's got some connections on the Blue Brand. His buddy Cesaro is there. He's in a bit of a faction along with Sami Zayn and Nakamura, so maybe that could be a potential direction that they go if he needs a little backup. Maybe they reform that group and kind of make a real legit stable of that crew there, or maybe we just kind of see him go out on his own. He is a former WWE champion, obviously a guy that Triple H looks fondly on, and I think if used right, he could be a main event level heel over on the SmackDown side. What did you think of Sheamus's return, and what do you think the future holds for him?
I pretty much completely agree with what you're saying there. When it comes to Sheamus re-debuting, as it were, he's returned so many times it's hard to even say. When it comes to the big return, you will always get a pop for a returning superstar, especially one as well known as Sheamus. So they had to be a little bit clever, but I don't think anyone really believed he was coming back as a face. The vignettes were quite heelish, even if they were a bit Drew McIntyre, and it's Sheamus. It's Sheamus. He's a bully. He always has been. That's always been his shtick, as it were. And it suits him very well. He's a big guy who kicks people in the head. That's bully material. That works. And when it comes to, I remember him bullying Apollo Crews. Now he's bullying Shorty G. We'll see what the future holds, but I don't think we're going to see him in a tag team again anytime soon. I think he is going to be that main event level talent. Cesaro himself told me before the SmackDown and Raw in Manchester that he plans on being a single star himself. Of course, that night he was then paired up with Shinsuke Nakamura, so we can't go by that stock. But I don't think he'll be teaming up with Sheamus again. But at the same time, that leaves me wondering what Sheamus is actually going to do. What is his actual purpose here? Because we've not got that many faces left. You've got Roman, you've got Bryan at the top of the card. There's not that many more. Maybe Kofi Kingston. Maybe we'll see Kofi Sheamus. But then are the New Day not going to wrestle at WrestleMania? I'm really not sure how he's going to slot in. Or is he maybe just going to work for a year or two with some of the younger, less established talent like Chad Gable. I'm not going to call him by what they call him. But like Chad Gable, like Ali, and people like that. Maybe Otis. I think there's a potential feud there. So we'll see as that develops. But I think they're very heel heavy now, but this may be a sign that they are embracing the fact that the Fiend, who's supposed to be a heel, is probably the least effective heel in wrestling history.
Well, the good guy side of things did get a little bit of help on Friday as well, because we also saw the return of the Usos. Jimmy and Jay, they returned to help out their cousin Roman Reigns in his feud with Baron Corbin and Dolph Ziggler. And we know that this is somewhat linked to the legal battles or the DUI charge that I think was it Jay? Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it Jay that was dealing with?
I believe it was
DUI?
Jay. Yes.
Okay. So obviously their disappearance from TV had to do with that incident, and so he was found not guilty. I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago that verdict came down, so they got back on TV pretty quickly. Once all that was resolved and done, they bring them back to television, and in a storyline that makes a lot of sense. They're backing up their cousin Roman Reigns. I actually on Twitter right after TLC, I kind of predicted, give myself a little pat on the back, that I thought the Usos would be the ones to come and give Roman Reigns some backup. And at the time, it was against the trio of Baron Corbin, Dolph Ziggler, and Robert Roode. Now Robert Roode is out of the picture for a while. Do you see a sixth heel kind of being added into this trio on Corbin's side to maybe make this a six-man war? Or do they need a sixth person? Could it be just the Usos and Roman against Ziggler and Corbin, and then whoever that third guy may be could be interchangeable from week to week?
A few things on this. The third guy will almost definitely be Robert Roode. Yes, he's been out for a while, but it was his first offence. It's a 30-day offence. He'll be back, I want to say 2 weeks. So I'd imagine next week the Usos start to get the upper hand with Roman. Maybe it'll be the Usos against Corbin and Ziggler. But then the week after, they'll be back. They'll start to push towards a six-man tag, Elimination Chamber, Fastlane, whichever one that is. When it comes to the Usos' return, first off, well done on your prediction. Pat yourself on the back. I'll pat you on the back.
Thank you.
We'll do that. I occasionally get predictions as well. I feel very good about them, so always a good point. But when it comes to the Usos, there is an article up from a YouTube video of mine on December 16th predicting the Usos will be back in the new year before the Royal Rumble. That was the news I had. I had it from a number of sources, but it was a number of different pieces of information. So, for example, one said they will be back the first show of 2020. They didn't tell me which show, though, so it could have been NXT, for example. And then another which just said they'll be back before the Rumble, but didn't say it would be in 2020. So you put those things together and you get a picture, but you can't report for definite this is what is happening. When it comes to that, yes, they were taking time off. There was a personal issue they had to resolve, but they also work on a limited date contract. I've been quoted as saying limited term because that is what I accidentally misspoke and said in the YouTube. It's not a limited term, it's limited date. So they only have to work so many shows per year, and they ran out. Last year it was just after WrestleMania. They were year before last, because we're in 2020 now. So 2018, they took time off just after WrestleMania. They appeared briefly around Money in the Bank and then vanished again and weren't seen much until SummerSlam. Like Daniel Bryan, like AJ Styles, like Randy Orton, there will be periods where these men simply are not on TV. They had some time banked up, they took the time off, now it's 2020, whole new set of dates, here they are again. So news came out, I was able to sort of announce that beforehand, but I'm glad to see the Usos back. They are, in my opinion, one of, if not the best tag team in the world, and as I mentioned, that tag team division looks incredible right now. You've got the New Day, you've got the Usos, you've got Heavy Machinery, you've got the Revival, you've got Miz and Morrison, potentially if they do go in that direction. It's a very attractive group. You've also got, let's not forget the best team possible there, B-Team, go, go, go. And where are they when you need them? They should have been helping Corbin. That's all I'm going to say.
Hey, how about the B team as the new entourage for Morrison and Miz? Why not just bring all four of those guys together?
It could work. The Miz-tourage was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I thought so too.
I love the Miz-tourage. It could be the Miz and the Moz-tourage.
I like it. Well, let's switch gears a little bit now and talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling Wrestle Kingdom. That was this weekend. And it was a great event, and we're going to touch on this probably a little bit later when we talk a little bit about Chris Jericho, but I'll go ahead and get your thoughts now. I want to get your thoughts on the show, but also I sent out a tweet earlier this weekend where I said basically, did anyone else know that Wrestle Kingdom was this weekend? I felt like compared to just a year ago, it was not hyped up nearly as much. I didn't feel like there was nearly as much excitement online. And I know that New Japan is still a niche audience. It's not the general wrestling audience that just watches, Raw and SmackDown, probably has no interest whatsoever in New Japan or Wrestle Kingdom. But I thought last year even, because of Jericho was still pretty fresh, being on the scene in New Japan, it was a big deal that he had debuted there, after leaving WWE again. You had Moxley coming around and rumors and stuff going around him. You had Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, guys like that. AEW wasn't really a thing yet. And so I just felt like last year's event really had a lot of momentum for New Japan going into it. And then this year's, like I said, I had to be reminded the day of that it was even happening. And this is basically their WrestleMania. So before I get your thoughts on the show itself, do you think that AEW in just a year's time has already kind of taken the steam out of New Japan or taken away any momentum that New Japan was possibly getting? Because we know that, they announced plans that we're getting a New Japan USA. They're going to branch out into the States. But did AEW already take the steam away from New Japan as an American entity that maybe they were building up from, if you look at it from last year's Wrestle Kingdom to now this year's?
New Japan, this is one of those things where it's pro wrestling fans, the hardcore fans against the casuals, as it were, but to a slightly different degree. So New Japan in Japan is bigger than I believe it has ever been. It's huge over there, and the numbers are growing and growing and growing, doing tremendous work. However, they have tried several times over the last 5 or so years to expand into the US, and it was working. Unfortunately, the people they put it on the back of, Cody Rhodes, Kenny Omega, Young Bucks, they're gone. They are now gone. None of them competed at this year's Wrestle Kingdom. You did have Chris Jericho, which is a good thing. You had John Moxley, which is a good thing. He's currently the United States champion. And I think we'll be seeing a lot more of the US title becoming more prominent, especially now that the IC title has been swallowed up sort of in the heavyweight championship. They're trying to expand. They need non-Japanese names. They need people like Moxley. They need people like Jay White to ascend higher and higher. And we've seen that this year because they need people that an American audience can look at and say, he's like me. Everyone looks for that relatable talent. And it's sort of a shame because there is so much talent there and it has this crossover appeal. But AEW, unfortunately, is affecting its competitors. WWE is not AEW's sole competitor, and people need to realize that. The growth of their women's division will impact, forgive the pun, impact women's division. It will impact the top line there when people start to come over. It's already had a heavy impact on Ring of Honor, who are struggling for talent now, well, at least name talent. And I think Wrestle Kingdom, at least we've been able to see the impact that is being felt. The lack of Omega really, just in particular Omega, really hurts New Japan because he was the New Japan guy. I think when you look at Will Ospreay potentially moving up into the heavyweights, you look at the work that Kenta's doing, he's now looking to be in a top level feud. You look at Moxley, the future is looking bright, but they are going to have to work even harder because the last 5 years or so have been essentially swept away by the rise of AEW.
Chris Jericho in his post-match press conference at Wrestle Kingdom did make some comments about AEW and New Japan possibly collaborating and working together. And he made the point, similar to what you were just talking about, that if New Japan wants to build their popularity or get some notoriety in the United States, it would probably be good for them to work with AEW. If AEW is wanting to expand and get some more worldwide and global recognition, then it would benefit them to work with New Japan and to be able to branch over into that company and get some exposure there. So do you think that an AEW New Japan partnership could be something that we would see? And if so, would that maybe scratch the plans for the New Japan United States kind of syndicate to where they would just, instead of running their own company in the United States, they would just simply use their New Japan stars on AEW and kind of have a combined effort on the stateside front, and then, like I said, AEW kind of use New Japan as a way to maybe grow their brand globally and over into Japan and other areas?
When it comes to that, New Japan's management do not want that working partnership. They simply don't, because they don't have faith that AEW, much like Impact is previously, they don't have faith that their talent will be used effectively. You look at what's just happened. They've demolished essentially a major TV deal because they will not work with Impact. A lot of this stems down to the use of Kazuchika Okada and what happened there. They still feel this and they hold it tight. When it comes to AEW, I have to wonder, everything Jericho said is true. It would help New Japan's expansion massively to be in AEW programming. It would give AEW a potential leg up in the race against NXT. Everyone would benefit. But to me, that sounds a little bit like a threat. Because on Wrestle Kingdom's card, you had John Moxley, who's AEW wrestling twice. You had Chris Jericho, who's the AEW champion wrestling. There's no working arrangement, but AEW talent is still wrestling there. To me, if you're saying, oh, well, if you have a working partnership, we'll help here, we'll help here. It sounds like Chris Jericho is saying, if you don't do it, you might not get Chris Jericho anymore. And you might not get John Moxley. It just, to me, it sounds a little bit like a threat. I hope that's not the way it was intended. I do believe everything Chris Jericho is saying is true. And for someone like Jericho, who's clearly of a very business mindset and knows how to work that business, I'm sure it comes from a good place. But that doesn't mean that I believe everyone in AEW's management is willing to let things continue as they are if a working partnership does not come.
That's a really interesting point that you make. And, regarding New Japan being maybe a little bit gun-shy about how their guys would be used, is there no thought that maybe New Japan, that those thoughts would maybe be a little bit eased with the fact that because Cody and the Bucks and Omega are kind of handling the booking, or, basically started the company, that because of their time in New Japan and the respect that they have for that company, that they wouldn't bring over, an Okada or a Tanahashi just to squash them and to put their own AEW guys over? You would think that group of guys would understand that these guys are stars and could make their brand just even that much stronger. But you're saying that New Japan doesn't seem to view it that way?
No, New Japan does not view it that way. When you consider they added a stake into the match between Jericho and Tanahashi. They added a stake that if Tanahashi won, he could come and compete for the AEW World Championship. If Tanahashi came over and won the AEW World Championship, then what's the point of the Chris Jericho-John Moxley story? What's the point of the Inner Circle? What is the point of everything they're building? I think you can say hand on heart, it is extremely unlikely that Tanahashi would come over and actually win the match. So what is being offered, even just in that, is, oh, we'll have your guy come over and lose. That's a bad start. And I don't think either of these companies would be happy, even if it was even. I think both of them would want to be slightly ahead. And we get to something sort of like the Invasion angle, back in the the tail end of the Attitude Era at least, where WCW guys came over and none of them got treated like stars. None of them came out of it looking good. Booker T immediately lost his championship and the crowd didn't warm to them. Now I think an AEW crowd would warm to New Japan stars, but at the same time, you talk about respect. Would it be showing respect to allow Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks to have appeared at Wrestle Kingdom? Because they didn't. Would it be showing respect to have Chris Jericho lose the match to Tanahashi? Because he didn't. So what would you consider to be a showing of respect, because at the moment, yes, everything's looking good for AEW. Both their guys won. All 3 of the matches they were in, they won. They're not putting people over so far.
Be interesting to see. It's a little bit like the more things change, the more they stay the same. You've got all these companies and all these options, but really at the end of the day, they're going to look out for number one, which is themselves. And so I don't think that you'll ever really see a true partnership where, an AEW or New Japan really kind of conglomerate into, essentially one company to take on the WWE or what have you. But I do think it would be interesting if they could bring some of those guys over. And I think some of those guys in Japan could be stars over here in AEW. I think it fits right in with kind of their aesthetic. But, I can also understand New Japan being a little gun shy. And we've heard stories before about that sometimes New Japan overestimates their popularity, or at least maybe in the States, they overestimate their value and their appeal to the mass audience, and that is somewhat cost them in the past, like with some of their deals back in the early 90s with WCW. We've heard stories that, they, again, wanting their guys to go over and things like that, and that meant a lot to them, and so that kind of dissipated that deal that they had with WCW at the time. So maybe we'll have a similar dynamic working here, but it'll definitely be interesting to see how all that shakes out. Let me get your thoughts on just Wrestle Kingdom itself, the show itself. What stood out to you? Any particular matches, any particular wrestlers at the show, and just kind of your thoughts of the show overall? I know, I was talking to you last night. Your sleep schedule was a bit altered. You were up and you watched the show and kind of definitely maybe threw your Sunday into a little bit of a tailspin, but you were up and watching. So, what did you think of the show itself? A 2-day event, which was unique in and of itself.
Well, the show started at 6 a.m. and 5 a.m. my time. So I was up, ready, and out the door about 20 minutes beforehand for each of them. I also stayed up for SmackDown, which started at 1 a.m. So I was up 1 a.m. till 3 a.m. watching SmackDown. I did a 25-minute post-show on YouTube, which took me to 3:30. And then I was up at 5:30, so 2 hours later, for the first show of Wrestle Kingdom. I then thought, okay, I'll have a nap. I'll be ready for the next one. I slept for 11 hours, so that didn't quite work out. But I'm fine now, and that's the important thing. I did miss a little bit of the show because there were some server problems. So I'll start with some of the negative. There were some server problems. Essentially, the server crashed during Jushin Thunder Liger's last match and didn't recover for about 2.5 matches. And even then, the frame rate dropped. Not terribly. After a while, it became unnoticeable, but it did stay dropped for the rest of the show. So there were some technical issues. There were also some refereeing issues. Top to bottom as well. 1, 2, 2.5, 3. That's not how you count a 3. It doesn't matter. That's not how you count a 3. And that happened in every match. There was always between 2 and 3 was longer than between 1 and 2. It was jarring. Match quality, very high. Gotta say that. I was confused initially as to why they split it into 2 nights and then booked everyone on both nights anyway. But apparently it's just because it's a weekend and they can afford to do a bigger show. Fair enough, by all means. When it came to some of the matches, Ospreay stood out, as he always seems to do. That was a very good match and he looked very good in defeat. For me, the big match, as it were, was Okada Ibushi, because I've never known anyone hate their own neck as much as Kota Ibushi. Every single thing that happened, he took it straight in the neck. Like, he took a low blow straight to the neck. I don't know how he does it. But is he indestructible? Because it seems ridiculous. Everything he took straight to the neck. It was the most stupid thing. He did a backflip and just landed on his head. He just plain landed on his head. He took 2 tombstones and he leaned his head back so he could bounce off his damn skull. What are you doing, Kota? Anyway, that match was very good. The first night, in my opinion, was considerably better than the second. But there were still some very good matches. There were still some very good moments. Kenta getting a lot of heat. I'm very excited for Moxley versus Suzuki. These are just two people who are going to try and rip the heart of their enemies out in the middle of the ring. I'm excited for that. But all in all, good shows. Lots of kicking out of finishes. Few refereeing questionable choices. Kota Ibushi trying to kill himself. Everything I want out of pro wrestling.
Well, let's talk about a guy on the card that may be drawing some interest here stateside from the WWE, and that is Jay White. I know he's been one of your favorites over the past year or two, has definitely been making some headway over in New Japan since he came in with the Switchblade character. And, you know, he's a guy, like you were mentioning earlier, about, you know, people that in the States can relate to. You know, he speaks English, he's not, you know, of Japanese descent or, you know, anything. So he's a guy that, according to some of your rumors and whispers, is a guy that the WWE have their eye on and have actually had their eye on for a little bit of time now.
I've heard a lot about this over the years, just a lot. But now that it's Wrestle Kingdom, people have been a bit more willing to talk about it. He's definitely popular within WWE. They've been talking about getting a package together and offering him a contract for a long time. But he will either sign a new deal or he'll mention something on a Talk with Jericho or something like that about not wanting to go to the WWE. But there are so many people in the WWE, not just management, but also the wrestlers themselves, who are desperate to work with Jay White. He is seen as sort of the perfect WWE heel. And I think a lot of that is because he is the perfect heel. He's the most despicable man it is possible to be. He's creepy, he is slimy, he is arrogant, he's magnificent in every possible way. It's just perfection. I cannot hate him more. It's great work. Personally, I would love to see him in the WWE. I think you could throw him against the Nakamura's and the AJ Styles, but also Jay White versus Seth Rollins is just... I mean, come on. Give me Kevin Owens versus Jay White. Give me all of those. It's just so much magic that could happen. He's doing very good things in New Japan. He does not want to leave, to my knowledge. But there is definitely a lot of people in the WWE who are trying to stir that pot and trying to make it happen.
Well, we appreciate Tom putting in the long hours, obviously the hardest working man in wrestling journalism today, staying up and giving us a report on Wrestle Kingdom. And we appreciate everyone listening to this episode of Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. We'll be back with you in a week or so with another episode, as we always are. And like Tom said, in the year 2020, we have no plans of stopping, so we're glad to still be here with you. Make sure you're subscribing to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel so that you get notifications on when our episodes drop. You can check out Tom and his work over on Sportskeeda.com. Follow him on Twitter at Colohue. You can follow me on Twitter if you would like, at Korey Gunz. And we appreciate everybody tuning in. Tom, anything you want to add? Like I said, as we bring this first of what we hope to be 52 episodes of the Dropkick DiSKussions here in the year 2020.
Not much to add, really. I think we've covered everything we wanted to do, but we will be talking about maybe some new ideas, maybe trying to shake things up a little bit with the podcast. I think it's done very well, but I've mentioned to Korey that I would like to maybe involve some guests or something like that. So if there's anyone you would like to see appear for 10-20 minutes of a podcast, by all means send us some messages on Twitter and we'll see about trying to make that happen. Don't say Seth Rollins. We're not that big.
Hey, don't sell us short. You never know. But yeah, absolutely. If you want to drop a comment on the YouTube video, if you want to send a DM to me, if you want to send a DM to Tom, I know I can speak for Tom that he's very interactive on Twitter. So send him a tweet or a message, and I'm sure he'll be glad to respond to you. And if you give us a good idea that we can make happen, we're all for it. So anything we can do to make the show better. But we appreciate everybody for tuning in. I appreciate Tom again for all his hard work and his reporting this week. And we will see you guys next time on another edition of Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda.